Good evening. Good evening. If everyone can begin making their way to their seats, we will begin the program shortly. Thank you. Good evening. May I have your attention? I ask that everyone begin to find their seats as we will be beginning our program shortly. Thank you. Good evening. May I have your attention? Good evening. I ask that you start making your way towards your seats as we will be beginning the program shortly.
Our table's right over here.
Good evening. Good evening. May I have your attention? Good evening. May I have your attention? I ask that you make your way to your seats as we will be beginning. Good evening. Good evening and welcome. I ask that you please make your way to your seat. I believe so. Am I on? Yep. Good evening. Good evening and welcome. I ask that you make your way to your seat as we will be beginning. My name is Elizabeth Newman, and I am the membership manager at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. It is my honor to welcome you to ISI's 15th annual Gala for Western Civilization. On behalf of ISI, I would like to thank you for attending this evening and for your continued support for ISI's mission and programs. We have a wonderful evening planned, and I ask that you help me welcome our first speaker, ISI's President and CEO, Johnny Burka.
Good evening. It's so good to see you all. Welcome to the largest in-person event in Washington, D.C. In the past 18 months, so you're record-breaking right now. We've got a wonderful program for you tonight. I want to start off by thanking the generous financial sponsors who made tonight possible. In particular, the Chairman Circle and Platinum sponsors. We have Linda Bean's Perfect Maine, Thomas Lynch, the Acton Institute, the Heritage Foundation, Hillsdale College, Jim Pearson, and James Cusser. I'd also like to thank our Congressional Host Committee members, Senators Tom Cotton, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz. As well as the ISI board members here tonight, and I'm actually going to ask them to stand up to thank them for their service to ISI. We have Chairman Thomas Lynch. You can save your applause for the end. We've got John Slavic, Larry Arnn, Alex Shafwin, Dave Durrell, Chris Long, and Elf Regnery. And I would also like to invite every ISI alumnus in the room to stand up. So that's honors scholars, Weaver Fellows, journalism fellows, or anyone who's had involvement on campus with ISI. Thank you. One of the things that I love about ISI events, which is so unique, and we saw it at our homecoming event in the spring, is that we have alums sitting in on panels and events, alums who are 85 years old and alums who are 22 years old. And it's so rare to be able to say that about many organizations. And it's great to bring the generations together and dream about the future that we are going to build together. So before we get started with our meal, we have a very special guest this evening who is going to say the blessing over the food. I'd like to welcome ISI board member Dave Durrell to give the blessing.
Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we ask that you bless our conversations tonight. We ask that you bless the food we're about to receive and those that prepared it. We thank you for this wineskin of ISI. We thank you for the picture of the Apostle Paul making disciples in the schoolhouse of Tyrannus. This is the opportunity that we have on 3,000 campuses. And we look at your word there in 2 Timothy 2 that says these things you've seen me say and do, and trust the faithful men who can teach others also. So Lord, bless the work of ISI, and thank for this great evening tonight. Bless our conversations. We pray all these things in your strong name, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you so much, Dave. If I could please direct your attention to the monitors for a special announcement. America has experienced dark moments before. One of the darkest occurred on September 11th, 1777. That morning, General George Washington met the advancing British Army at the Battle of the Brandywine.
It was the biggest single-day engagement of the American Revolution, and it was a crushing defeat for the Patriots.
Imagine how Washington must have felt as he made his long and lonely retreat that night. He knew that America's great experiment in liberty could be over barely a year after it had begun. You might be feeling demoralized today too. I wouldn't blame you. America is unwell. The virus of radicalism that began to spread on the college campus in the 1960s now has consumed every major institution in American life. Young people today no longer learn the true story of America or its rich tradition of liberty. Not in the classroom, not on social media, and certainly not from Hollywood. But they do learn it from the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. ISI has been educating for liberty since 1953, when we were founded by William F. Buckley Jr. ISI shapes outstanding students who go on to be virtuous leaders in every corner of American life. Our alumni include opinion leaders, Supreme Court justices, entrepreneurs and innovators, and acclaimed scholars and teachers. We used to be a supplement to a student's education. Now, we're the main course. That is why ISI is launching the Roots of American Renewal campaign, a $75 million initiative to restore learning and leadership. This is a bold plan to establish ISI as America's counter-university, the place that fills the void for future leaders trapped in a higher education system gone mad. With your help, ISI's Roots of American Renewal campaign will build a national conference center to bring together promising young people from all over the country. It will endow scholarships for students and rising journalists. And it will expand educational opportunities for students, alumni, and faculty, strengthening ISI's vibrant nationwide community. This may be a dark moment for America, but we can learn from how George Washington responded to his dark moment. Washington didn't give in to despair. With the cause of liberty at stake, he regrouped and rebuilt his troops in the Brandywine Valley, right up the road from ISI's national headquarters. Victory is still possible for us in this current crisis, but only if we invest in and mentor the next generation of leaders. That is exactly what ISI does. America needs leaders who understand the words, deeds, and creeds of the great men and women throughout history. Leaders who understand that the American order established in Philadelphia has roots extending back to Jerusalem, Athens, Rome, and London. That is why ISI is stepping up as America's counter-university. We can't do it without your help. Will you join us in shaping the principled leaders that our great nation needs? Will you help us to ensure that the cause of liberty endures for our children and our children's children? Go to isirenewal.org to get your copy of this plan to renew American learning and leadership. Thank you. ISI is launching its Roots of American Renewal campaign because the leadership crisis that we see in America all around us, but particularly right here in Washington, D.C., began on the college campus and must be addressed at its source. ISI is uniquely positioned to do this. For nearly 70 years, through our network of over 4,000 conservative professors, 125 campus groups, 75 collegiate network newspapers, we are uniquely positioned to identify, educate, mentor, and strategically place the leaders that America needs through our alumni network of over 50,000 strong throughout the country. Higher education today is graduating managers of American decline. ISI is educating agents of American renewal, educating them in the foundations of Western and American political, cultural, and economic thought, and equipping them to apply the wisdom of the great tradition to the unique challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. I think everyone in this room can pretty much agree that our country is headed in the wrong direction. I've attended multiple events this week where people have been wondering, is our constitutional republic in peril? And the answer is maybe. However, I mean this sincerely, I personally have hope, and we at ISI have hope, and I want you here tonight to have hope too. We have hope, not vainly. We have hope because we have seen the promise of our students, our faculty, our alumni, and supporters, and it's hard to be down for long when you're meeting with these students, talking with them on a daily basis, and you see how hungry they are to learn about America's founding principles, how fed up they are with what they're getting in the classroom, and just how eager they are to plug into an institution like ISI. We have hope because we know the truth of what we teach our students, that America has roots that extend all the way back to Jerusalem, Rome, Athens, London, roots which sprang up in Philadelphia, where our nation's experiment in liberty was born, and that if we were going to turn this country around, we must nourish those roots, we must water them and embrace them, and not reject them and hack away at them like our contemporary university system and culture tells us to do today. And we are hopeful because we have a plan at ISI to restore learning and leadership to America by her 250th anniversary in 2026. Americans deserve better leaders, and ISI will provide them. Over the next 5 years, through our $75 million Roots of American Renewal campaign, we will fill the void in the higher education system by educating the leaders that America needs. We're going to do this by growing in 5 strategic ways. The first, we're going to build a counter-university campus at ISI. I said it in the video, for a long time, ISI was a supplement to what students were getting in the classroom. Now it really is the main course. If ISI doesn't teach students what they need to know, they're likely not going to get it anywhere. So we're currently in the process of building a beautiful conference center, the Linda L. Bean Conference Center, which will be the home for our national educational program. It'll be a place where we can welcome the best students and professors from throughout the country, but it's also a place that will be open to all of you as our alums and as the conservative intellectual movement. We hope it can become the Camp David of the right, the place where we can invite the great scholars, the great statesmen, and the great journalists to strategize about how we take our country back. Number 2, we're going to expand innovative educational opportunities for our students. So this means in addition to the 150 events that we do on campuses around the country each year, we will also add a series of 8 to 10 back-to-back summer schools run out of ISI's new conference center. And I'm also proud to announce tonight that we'll be launching a special partnership with Joseph Prudhom's Institute at Washington College, where we'll be offering 4 credit courses for students from throughout the country. The topic of the course will be liberty in the American political tradition and liberty in the Western political tradition. They'll be able to take these courses either online or in person. We'll have a study abroad trip to Oxford and to Prague. And the genius of it is that students can actually then transfer these credits back to their universities, opt out of the silly political theory courses they might otherwise have to take, and take a course that's been approved by an ISI professor and taught with ISI curriculum. Number 3, we're going to invest in our alumni network. We've got 50,000 alumni, but they're only valuable to us and to our students if they're engaged with what ISI is doing. So we're going to continue the tradition that we started this year of an annual alumni homecoming weekend. We had 300 people attend this past year. We want to make it 400 this coming year. And we'll also be launching a new program for young and mid-career professionals. This will be called our George Washington Statesmanship Program. It is focused on the theory and application of politics, philosophy, and economics. So it'll start with foundations, but it will move quickly to the great statesmen throughout Western and American history, focusing on how they applied their principles in moments of crisis. And then we'll conclude by taking stock of our country as it is today. Conservatives like to complain about things like big government, big tech, Hollywood, the Met Gala, but how often do they understand how these structures of power actually work and what they need to do to reform them? And the capstone of this program will be sending the 12 select fellows as ambassadors of ISI to Normandy, where they will go to Tocqueville's chateau, where he wrote Democracy in America, and represent ISI at an international conference of conservative leaders. So be on the lookout for emails about this, because I'd love to have you apply or to recommend others to apply for the program. Two more strategic areas. The next one is faculty. The ISI education is only as good as the faculty members who teach our students, so we'll be launching national and regional conferences for professors, both for academic development and also for professional development, especially for the young professors coming through our Weaver Fellows program. It's a crazy world on college campus today. It's a lot to navigate, and so we want to provide them resources to do that, as well as funds for ISI professors to be able to bring their campus societies and students to our national headquarters for retreats throughout the year. And finally, we are going to scale up our digital content and marketing in a big way, chiefly by launching a new website with daily content for Modern Age Online. Modern Age Journal was founded by Russell Kirk in 1957, and today it is edited by Daniel McCarthy, a man who I believe is the foremost conservative editor in the country, and he has big plans to make Modern Age Online a daily site for all of you. So by expanding in these 5 strategic ways, we will build an ecosystem, we'll create a culture of enterprise, out of which will emerge the leaders that America needs to restore learning and leadership by her 250th anniversary in 2026. Finally, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for the generosity of our supporters. I mentioned it was a $75 million campaign. To date, we've secured over $12.5 million in commitments for the campaign. And there is someone very special here tonight that I would like to thank. George Meyer and his wife Sally have stepped up with a generous commitment to help kickstart the campaign, both to help us fund our new headquarters, our new Counter University campus with our Linda Bean Conference Center, but also to expand our core educational program. So please join me in thanking George for his generosity. And I would also like to thank Linda Bean, who is not with us here this evening, but she is watching virtually, for her generous lead gift to help to fund our new conference center. Now we're going to move to one of my favorite parts of tonight's program, our awards ceremony. So we're giving out 2 awards tonight, and the first one is the Charles H. Hofflick Lifetime Achievement Award. This award is named in honor of Charles Hofflick, who is a longtime ISI trustee. He served on the board for nearly 6 decades. He was one of our founding board members. And this award is not something that we give out on an annual basis. It's only given on select occasions for particularly deserving individuals. And past recipients of this award, it's quite an esteemed list. It includes William F. Buckley Jr., Gerhard Niemeyer, Ed Follner, M. Stanton Evans, Lou Lehrman, Richard V. Allen, Lee Edwards, Jack Templeton, and Larry Arnn. And I'm proud to announce that this year's winner is Diana Davis Spencer. Diana has been supporting ISI for over 3 decades. In particular, she funds a special debate series, which is a fan favorite among our students. We pick debates on hot-button topics. We bring them to campuses around the country. And for many liberals on these campuses, this is the first time they actually get to hear the other side of the argument. And we get to demonstrate civil discourse, which is something we value and Diana values. Diana is one of the great American philanthropists of our day and also a great philanthropist of the conservative movement. It's indeed hard to conceive of the conservative movement in America without the generous support and vision of Diana Davis Spencer. Her foundation. Her foundation values individual liberty, entrepreneurship, strong civil society, civic education, national security, and America's founding values, all things that we hold dear at ISI. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Diana Davis Spencer. Sure.
Yeah, I think down. Yeah. Well, what a happening. It is so energizing to be in a room with conservatives. Thank you, Johnny and ISI, for this very special honor on me. But most of all, for ISI promoting free speech and debate on the college campus. We are so fortunate to live in America, a country with a constitution that embraces our freedoms. As in Lee Greenwood's song, God Bless the USA, I am proud to be an American. Albert Einstein understood the benefits of a free society. The important thing, he said, is not to stop questioning. We as Americans have the freedom and the responsibility to question, unlike some countries where there is no bedrock of freedom. In 1959, I visited the Soviet Union, a country that blacklisted citizens who attended church, a country where opportunity meant holding a prescribed job for life, a country where questioning was a crime. As tourists, we were assigned a guide who would often shake her fist and berate us with "nyat," no, if we spoke to an inquisitive Soviet or meandered away from her sight. In the 90s, I was included on a Cuban mission trip to support free-loving Cubans. We brought suitcases full of supplies, including books distributed to an underground network of free libraries. These were spaces and apartments of leaders in the freedom movement. We were taken to one of these so-called free libraries and met a mother and her 8-year-old daughter, so joyful, picking out their weekly limit of 2 books unavailable in the open market. They were risking their lives to open up new worlds. Oprah Winfrey notes, education is the key to unlocking the world, a passport to freedom. We as Americans must not take these freedoms for granted. President Reagan warned, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Thank you, ISI, for steadfastly stroking the flames of knowledge, truth, and freedom. And thank you all for keeping freedom alive.
so much, Diana. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. Our next award winner, and our next award is the George W. Kerry Professor of the Year Award. This is named in honor of one of the foremost interpreters of the American political tradition, the longtime Georgetown professor, ISI board member, and associate editor of Modern Age, George Kerry. This year's award goes to Dr. Daniel J. Mahoney. Dr. Mahoney is a professor emeritus at Assumption University and a senior fellow at the Real Clear Foundation. In many respects, he is Mr. ISI. This summer, he will be teaching at his 15th honors conference, so he's a longtime favorite of our students. He's published 3 books with ISI, including co-editing the Solzhenitsyn Reader and the Conservative Foundations of the Liberal Order. He's a regular contributor for Modern Age, and he continues to speak on campuses across the country for us. I would also like to make a plug for his new book, which is not out yet, but I've read a manuscript. It'll be coming out with Encounter Books, and it's called The Statesman as Thinker, 10 Portraits of Greatness, Courage, and Moderation. And that book will actually be the foundation of the statesmanship portion of our fellows program, and Dan will be teaching that. So we're very excited to have Dan plugged in with ISI. So without further ado, Daniel J. Mahoney.
Well, thank you so much, Johnny, for those very eloquent and generous words. I'm very honored to be receiving the George Kerry Award from ISI. I knew George reasonably well, a most decent and honorable man, very low-key, but quite capable of getting lively when important matters were at stake. He was a true master of American political thought. One didn't have to agree with everything, but he had an authority, a knowledge of our tradition, and he was just a stellar theorist and advocate for what he called constitutional morality. We don't have much of that around anymore, in case you didn't notice. He was also what we used to call a Christian gentleman. The philosopher Karl Leuwith once said, "Can a Christian be a gentleman?" He says, "Some people say no, but I know 500 of them." So he was a Christian gentleman and also a model of a teacher scholar at work, both at Georgetown University, where he taught for many years, along with another dear friend of mine, Father James V. Scholl. He was also editor of the Political Science Reviewer, which was a great alternative voice for sort of free thinking about politics and political philosophy. And he was very active in organizations like ISI and Liberty Fund. So for those of you who don't know who George Kerry was, now you know a little bit more. And as Johnny mentioned, I've had a very long-term association with ISI, and it's been an extremely positive association. I've written many articles. I wrote many articles for the late lamented Intercollegiate Review. I continue to write for Modern Age under the excellent editorship of Dan McCarthy. I'm coming back to the summer honors program. Well, I used to, be able to stay up to 2 o'clock with the students, but I found myself drifting to my room at 9:30. So I need to renew those capacities. And I've been very involved over the years in running a symposia for both undergraduates and graduate students alike, symposia usually done in conjunction with the Liberty Fund. I think Johnny was absolutely right in his opening remarks. I've got to tell you all, the situation in the colleges and universities is grave. My students believe communism is good in theory and not so bad in practice. Mainly decent folk, but the majority of them come into college. They don't know anything, but they know that there are 153 genders and mainly more coming. They've been taught that the greatest Americans of the last 2 or 3 centuries are for the most part charlatans who represent exploitation and injustice, etc. It's not impossible, I think, to shake people out of these views, but I think we all remember a time when Americans were believers in the First Amendment, maybe too much believers in the First Amendment. You know, the Nazis had the right to march in Skokie, and the Communist Party could conspire against our republic, but the left no longer believes in the First Amendment, and we see the results of that in our college campuses, the sort of tyrannical and censorious group of both professors and students who, are really committed, I think, to making liberal inquiry and maybe what we might call the whole tradition of liberal learning, of a kind of naive openness to truth. Truth not arbitrarily imposed, but truth as sort of the direction of the human soul at its best and its highest. I just following up what Johnny said and the wonderful new initiatives of ISI, we need, who would have thought this 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago? We need what the Czech Catholic dissident Václav Benda in his clandestine writings of the 70s and 80s called a parallel polis. At least parallel cultural, intellectual, and educational institutions, where the spirit of liberal inquiry, of philosophical reflection on politics, broad political sanity, and I guess what we could only call civic gratitude, some sense of indebtedness. Bertrand de Juvenal, author ISI people have liked over the years, once wrote, "The wise man knows himself for debtor." In other words, gratitude should be the initial and fundamental response of the human person to reality. And instead, we have what the late Roger Scruton so eloquently called a culture of repudiation, negation, rejection, repudiation. There's a word for that. It's called nihilism. So we have a lot of work to do, and I certainly look forward to continuing to working with ISI for a long time to come. I'm a senior fellow with the Real Clear Foundation, and we've been doing an awful lot to try to draw together our best civic resources, serious, sustained thought on this gift, which is the American Republic, which is under assault. And also, I think, some future efforts to bring together a dialogue, some disputations among conservatives and between conservatives and anti-woke liberals, the unclassifiables, you know who I mean, the people who still think, and the small vanishing tribe of liberals who believe in free discussion. So they won't be liberal for too much longer, but that's the... Anyway, I'm very pleased that Johnny is putting so much emphasis on statesmanship for future projects and efforts at ISI. And just to end, I should say, my own work of late has really, I wrote a book on Charles de Gaulle years ago called De Gaulle, Statesmanship, Grandeur in Modern Democracy. It's an old theme of mine, but I'm really interested in recovering reflection on a rare series of human beings who are so essential to free politics and civilization. Really, the study of genuinely reflective, even philosophically minded statesmen who embodied greatness of soul, but a greatness of soul marked by moderation, by a public-spirited concern for the public good, and genuine depth of soul. Now, that sounds like utopia, but there really have been such human beings who have embodied what Orestes Brownson called public spirit, intelligence, foresight, broad views, manly feelings, wisdom, energy, and resolution. And in my book, I treat such figures as Solon, Cicero, Burke, the great Washington, Tocqueville, Lincoln, Churchill, de Gaulle, and Václav Havel, while making collateral reference to people like Pyotr Stolypin, the last great political man in Russia, and of course Reagan and Thatcher. And I'll just end by saying, as I was writing the introduction to my book this summer, I happened to pick up a book called The Memoirs d'Outre-Tombe, Memoirs from the Other Side of the Tomb by Chateaubriand, the author of The Genius of Christianity. He was Tocqueville's cousin, uncle, something like that. They were related. But anyway, Chateaubriand was a royalist, a liberal, and an anti-Napoleonic figure. And in his memoir, he happened to have met Washington twice, and he knew Napoleon and hated Napoleon. And in any case, he said, Bonaparte he was a great man. Tocqueville said, Bonaparte was as great as you could be without being good. His soul was sort of invaded by fear and suspicion and had become, over the years, coldly despotic. And Chateaubriand says, his great qualities remained the same, but his good dispositions became impaired and no longer supported his great qualities. Corrupted by that original stain, his nature deteriorated. So he says, when Napoleon, he's thrown out twice, Elba and then St. Helena. And, what could Napoleon do? He was nothing without ruling despotically over others. And Chateaubriand compares Washington, the American Cincinnatus. It's an old trope, but Washington knew when to go home. But he says, look, he saw in Washington, he says, quite remarkable man. Yes, he spoke about natural rights and freedom, but he had an antique grandeur, a Roman simplicity. And he was a remarkable example of a citizen soldier, as I said a moment ago, who knew how to go home. And in one passage, Chateaubriand met him when he wasn't famous in Philadelphia in 1791, and he said, I was a nobody, and he later on wasn't a nobody, but he said, he felt fortunate indeed, I quote, that the great man's gaze should have fallen upon him. And listen to these wonderful words from Chateaubriand. He says, there is virtue in the gaze of a great man. So here he is in his 80s, at the end of his life, reflecting on the sort of vacant soul of a too tyrannical Napoleon, solitary, self-sufficient, but the man who didn't know how to go home. His life was a desert. And he looks back to Washington as a man who exuded virtue from his very soul. The statesman, the statesman of merit, as opposed to a tyrant with a hollow, if self-aggrandizing soul. So these are the themes we need to restore, not this culture of repudiation. Lincoln is a racist, Washington. You never learn Washington freed all the slaves in his last will and testimony, do you? No. But, we just repudiate, we just cancel, we lose the sense of appreciation, we fail to make distinctions. And I think a recovery of a scholarship and pedagogy of freedom really has to recover a sense of the multiple reasons why a free and civilized people ought to be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Please enjoy your dinner, and we'll be back in about 45 minutes. Come on up, yep. With the award or without it.
Churchill's famous motto about awards and medals was never search them out, never turn them down, never wear them.
Okay.
But he didn't say not who.
There we go.
Okay.
All right.
Now? So you can read it. You tell me. Got it. And you want my fingers out of the way. Got it.
All right.
You always find, especially with a big group of photos when they're trying to get rid of them, they have a good smile. And then it degenerates into a fake smile after. Yeah. It's getting stale.
It's getting stale. Yeah. All right.
By the way, after listening to your
Oh,
thing,
that's great.
because I thought that focus on statesmanship was so.
Oh, great. I think.
Did you finish the whole manuscript?
Not like 80% of it.
That's good.
Yeah.
You're well around your way.
Johnny? All right. A wonderful speech. She went back down. Let's just let her fly. All right. Hands behind the back. If I could please have your attention, we're going to get started. If I could please have your attention, if you could make your way to your seats. If we could please have your attention, please make your way to your seats. If you could please make your way to your seats. If I could please have your attention. I hope that you all enjoyed your dinner. It's my privilege to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. I've known Dr. Arnn for 14 years, and when you're only 32 years old, knowing someone for 14 years is saying something. That means that Dr. Arnn has at least 14 embarrassing stories to tell about me. I'm sure he's been keeping track. I thought I'd actually preempt him and tell one of my more embarrassing Dr. Arnn stories. I was the embarrassing one. It was the week of graduation, my senior year at Hillsdale, and I thought it was the perfect time to try to schedule a unannounced meeting with Dr. Arnn. So I reached out to his assistant and I said, I have something very urgent. Can I have 30 minutes of Dr. Arnn's time? And she said, well, Johnny, it's the week of graduation. There's donors here. There's all this going on. What do you need to talk to him about? And I said, well, I can't tell you, but I just need the meeting. And so she squeezed me into his schedule. And I had developed this plan. 6 weeks from graduation, I was moving to Europe to go to grad school. And I thought, well, why shouldn't Hillsdale College fund my graduate school in Europe? It made sense to my 22-year-old brain. And so I prepared a whole pitch deck, and I sat down with Dr. Arnn. He had no clue what I was going to ask him, and I laid the argument out. Here's where Hillsdale is deficient. Here's why if you pay for my graduate education, I can fill that gap and then come back and basically work as his indentured servant for a few years until I pay off my grad school. Well, he looked at me, I think he was totally shocked, and said, Burka, are you out of your mind? He said, get out of my office and come back when you've done something useful with your life. So I was in his office about a week later. And 1 week later, I thought, well, now, I've struck out once, but we'll try again. My fraternity house needs a new house, and so maybe Dr. Arnn can buy one for us. So he took the meeting. I think we had a couple of his staff members there, a couple of my fraternity brothers. And by the end of the meeting, he said, yes, we will buy a house for the Delts. So he picked up the phone and called an unsuspecting professor and convinced the professor to sell the house to the college, and we got our fraternity house. So the moral of this story is that Dr. Arnn, you win some and you lose some. And over the past 14 years, I've just decided to keep on asking for things. And because I asked him to give the keynote tonight, you all are the beneficiaries of my persistence. So you're welcome. But in all sincerity, there's no one who I respect more than Dr. Arnn. In my senior year, September of 2011, a decade ago, in my Aristotle class with Dr. Arnn, in my notebook, the very first thing that I wrote was a quote from Dr. Arnn, and that quote was this. He says, you are what you do, and it matters very much what you do. You are what you do, and it matters very much what you do. And I know that stuck with me, it stuck with my students in the classroom, but it's also something that really resonates for us at ISI, because it's important to teach students how to think, but it's even more important that those principles make it from their head all the way down to their heart, that they learn to put those into action and through habit habituate themselves to becoming virtuous people. And that's hard when you're 22 years old to really understand what that means in practice, but it is possible if you have a teacher like Dr. Arnn, who is truly a statesman, a man who exhibits greatness of soul and who actually embodies the virtues that he teaches on a daily basis. So I could think of no better person to address us here this evening on the topic of education and the state of education in America. Dr. Larry P Armstrong is the 12th president of Hillsdale College, where he's also a professor of politics and history. He received his BA from Arkansas State and his MA and PhD in government from the Claremont Graduate School. He studied at Worcester College, Oxford, where he served as director of research for Sir Martin Gilbert, the official biographer of Winston Churchill. From 1985 to 2000, he was president of the Claremont Institute. He serves on the board of directors of the Heritage Foundation, the Henry Salvatori Center of Claremont McKenna College, the Philadelphia Society, the Claremont Institute, and the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. He is the author of 3 books, most recently Churchill's Trial, Winston Churchill, and the Salvation of Free Government. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Larry P Armstrong.
Good evening. The 3 people who've put up with Johnny the longest are here. I'm one of them, and his parents are there. They should stand up. A few reasons why I'm proud to be here. ISI gave me money when I was in graduate school. That's why Chris Long was able to compel me to come onto the board. And I remember, because he's a liar, he told me I wouldn't have to do very much. And then I met Thomas Lynch, the chairman, who's a slave driver and an excellent chairman. And I was involved in the elongated process of hiring Johnny Burka to run ISI. And they're talking about him, Chris and Alf Regnery and Thomas and this guy, Johnny Burka is really great. And I sort of waked up and I said, wait, is that my Johnny Burka? I said, is he 12 years old? Johnny was, when he was a freshman, a very high-minded young man. And by the time he became a senior, he'd become very pushy. And you know, the young are foolish in everything they do. And Johnny's way of being pushy was very foolish. But he's getting better now, and I'm beginning to be afraid of him. ISI is a great thing, and I am pleased to speak to you who support it, and thank you for that. So one of the things about teaching is you get to watch your kids grow up and they become successes, and that's very satisfying because you can take credit for whatever they do, even though you know you didn't do it. People don't know that, right? So they think I did that, right? I didn't do that. But also they do begin to tell you what to do, and that's a little annoying. One of my students said once, he said something to me and I got a little sharp with him, and he turned to a friend of his, and they were like, that young man, the particular young man, is the chief of staff to Kevin McCarthy in the House of Representatives right now. He's like a success. And he said something that kind of warned me about something. And I said, who do you think you're talking to? Because I'm, kind of tough. And this boy's name is Will Dunham, and he turned to his friend Andrew Fink, who's now our representative in the Michigan legislature, and pray God he's better than the ones before. And he said, see, he's not a tame lion still, is he? Still. I hate that still. So Johnny orders me to talk to you about the founders of education, and I have no choice but to comply. And I'll do that briefly, and we can go back to our party. Johnny is successful at ISI, by the way. They turned to me at one point, and because I can vouch for him in a different way than others. And they were charmed by him. I was astonished at that. And they said, can he do this job? And I said, probably. I said, but there's something I know. And they said, what? And I said, he will not lie to you. That's a fact. Quite a guy. He's also, have you seen his wife? He married way above himself. So I'm ordered to talk about the founders in education, and there was a fortuitous event this morning. There was an excellent article in the Wall Street Journal by Crispin Sartwell, whoever that is. He's a philosophy professor at Dickinson College, and bless that college for having this guy. And what he says, the title of the thing is, "What have I done to deserve this?" And he cites the authorities who tell him what he deserves. They include, of course, Joe Biden. By the way, if you haven't do a Google search for how to talk Bidenese and watch that. It will make you laugh and it will make you cry. He cites Barack Obama. He cites social media, especially Twitter. He cites the advertisements of major corporations. And they tell him what he deserves. He deserves accountability, respect. He deserves answers and the truth. He deserves solace, compassion, and empathy. I'm reading the list. He goes through all this. He deserves community, love, liberation, and reciprocity. He deserves an excellent education, also free health care. He deserves peace of mind, and he deserves a new sport utility vehicle. And he allows that he was getting carried away by all this because his self-esteem was just going through the roof. And then, he's a thinking man, which is a kind of a curse. And it occurred to him, these people don't know me. How do they know that I deserve all these things? Here's what they know about me, because they say what they know about him and everyone else. They know he follows social media. Also, television advertising. They know he lives in America, whether citizen or no. Or if he follows social media, they know he lives somewhere else, anywhere, as long as you follow social media. And then he reflects, that means billions of people deserve all these things. But there aren't enough of those things. See, it's a curse to learn something. ISI is unsuiting the young for the modern world. Because if there's too much and yet everybody deserves, how are we going to allocate? Someone is going to allocate. They're going to decide who gets what. And they're going to deprive each of the opportunity to get what he deserves. This question of what we deserve is a question about justice. Justice is the most public of the moral virtues. A few people can be courageous. One can be temperate. Justice is about what we do with each other. And so, if everybody deserves everything, that's a claim about justice. And unfortunately, some of the greatest books ever written have that as their central theme, beginning, of course, with one of the few greatest, Plato's Republic. And here's the cussed thing about Plato's Republic. It is a very beautiful book. If you haven't read it, go home and do it tonight. It'll take a few nights. But the book is difficult. It's challenging. And that means not everybody gets it quick, and some not at all. Is that fair? Because does everybody deserve to be wise? Most people can't even give an accurate definition of what that word means. We throw around the word philosophy like it was bubble gum. But it means the love of wisdom. What is wisdom? Hard to say. Because these great things separate the wheat from the chaff, the great war underway at Hillsdale College is between the chemistry and the biology departments. The biology department is bigger. A chemist is the provost of the college now, succeeding the useless Whalen who sits over there. And, you guys know him, don't you? And he is given to say, we're very indiscreet at Hillsdale College, and so he's given to say, And he's the provost now, right? He was the dean of that science division. And he's given to say that chemistry separates the sheep from the goats. Biology does not. And you know, anybody here a bio major? And if so, why? You couldn't pass chemistry? That's how we think at Hillsdale College. But the point is, there's an animus, isn't there? I mean, there's not at Hillsdale College because we take pride that there, you know, our entering scores this year are 1 point below Harvard. And if we flattered them and admitted all the ones, well, you know, who gives a flip about that? They're ignorant as hell. I mean, they're still as ignorant as Johnny Burka was when he was a freshman. And, you know, if we admitted everybody who got a perfect score who applied on the entrance exams, we would be at Harvard or a little above. But we don't like them coming in being cocky. You know, if you think you know something, you need humility. Also, you need aggression. You need to think you can learn. You need to think it's a tall order. You need to think you have to give your life to it. And this article in the Wall Street Journal, what is it except a demonstration that we are depriving the young of their lives? One of the things that has to go is the Declaration of Independence. What's wrong with it is that it's elevated. Do you realize, I mean, when I think of the terrors that are threatening right now, two of the worst, the National Archives has put trigger warnings on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. Wow. And then Matt Spaulding tells me that they've made a plan for repurposing the rotunda of the National Archives, one of the most beautiful places in the world. Where resides the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence? Two, surely, of the greatest blessings that humankind has ever made for itself under the hand of God. And they're going right now. Why? Because they propose, you know, the Declaration of Independence contains the phrase merciless Indian savages. And, you know, if you're savage and merciless, whatever you are, that's condemnatory, to be condemned. But that's why it gets a trigger warning. And the Constitution gets a trigger warning because they claim it protects slavery, whereas James Madison takes pride that they forbade that word to be put in there because it was to have no seat in the governing document of the greatest of free republics. What's wrong with the document is that it sets a standard and we are expected to live up to it. And that means we all have to recognize that there's a little bit of Johnny Burka in each of us. And we can be what Johnny Burka has become if we're determined enough. But you have to know where you start is not perfect, and when you finish can be more perfect, but not perfect. It's that discipline that we hate. And it's devastating. Where did the founders get this extraordinary language that they wrote? They read some books. It's remarkable the books they read. It's remarkable how much they knew about them. Benjamin Franklin was fond of Plutarch. Have you read Plutarch's Lives? It's a series of parallel essays between a Greek and a Roman. And you see, by the time of Plutarch, it had always become true, already become known that the thing that happened in Greece and the thing that succeeded in Rome are awesome, and they're different from anything before them. And so they took the heroes of each and they set them against each other and explained how their lives worked. And they picked the ones who were similar with one another. Plutarch did, right? But I'll tell you what's interesting when you read them. Nobody's perfect. In fact, most of them who made names for themselves that have lasted for 3,000 years, most of them ended in some kind of tragedy. And in most cases, that was due to something about them. Now think of the posture of that. That means greatness can only be measured against a standard of perfection, and humans don't reach that standard. It is to call us up and inspire us. And that is the specific thing that is being excluded from education now, and excluded by force of law. Franklin also loved Xenophon. George Washington, who was not so academic as some of the founders, just greater, he loved the play by Addison, the great English playwright and journalist, Cato, which was a recreation of the strongest figure in the Roman Republic, including the death of the Roman Republic. Jefferson recommends Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, and Sidney. Now, those books are not easy. They're just great. And we don't sit, there's a professor, there's a lot of very good professors at Hillsdale College, and that's an understatement. They're awesome. And one of them is Steve Smith, and he's a dean now, so he's getting kind of fat and happy. But I went into his class one time. I like to walk around and make mischief with the college, and no one can stop me. And so I looked through the little slit in the door and see what's going on, and he's in there, and it turns out it's the first class of the term. And I walked in and sat down in the back, and he's teaching Shakespeare. And here's how he starts the class. I happened to get there just in time. And he said something that my professor, Harry Jaffa, used to say. He says, "Have you read this book?" And if you ask a room full of students that, they're embarrassed when they haven't. No. And he said, "Oh, I envy you the chance to read this book for the first time." I can remember when I heard those words from Harry Jaffa about Aristotle's Ethics, and I have never stopped reading that book, right? That's because it is a beautiful book. It just takes a little effort, and if you make the effort, that's when you see the beauty, and of course you appreciate the beauty because you have made the effort. What we're doing now, and I think it's tragic to say to you that it's a bipartisan effort by which we're doing it, is that we're taking the effort out of life. We are depriving people of the chance to live a fully human life. And that's partly because we don't know what that is. Did you ever seriously ask yourself the question, what are you? What kind of thing am I? I will tell you, the first line of Aristotle's Ethics is that every choice and action and inquiry and art, which are, by the way, all the forms of voluntary human action. He says they seem to aim at some good, and therefore it is beautiful to say that the good is that for which all things aim. And the teacher that I read that first with, and I'm teaching that book this term, we spent a month on book 1 of the Ethics, and it doesn't even take up the whole first page. Chapter 1 of book 1. And in the whole graduate seminar in the Ethics, we never got out of book 1. And we skipped the part about him having an argument with Plato because he said, that's too complicated for you. And yet, on the other hand, we talked about everything on earth. And he said this thing, he said, I remember it's the first words I heard him say in class. I was honored to get to go pick him up to go to class, and I was appalled because I'd given up going to law school to go and study with this guy. And he couldn't remember who I was, and he couldn't remember the senior graduate student who was with me, who took me there to pay me honor to pick him up and take him to class. And he kept saying like 3 times, "What is this class again?" But then it started, and he began to speak magic. He said, "People get old like me, and they make a list of the 100 greatest books. Life is too short to read 100 books. I have a list of the 3 greatest books." Now, when I say that, do you want to know what they are? Everyone wants to know that. I believe that there's a line you can draw from the first line of Aristotle's Ethics through the last book of the Metaphysics. The first line talks about us and our love for higher things, and the last book of the Ethics of the Metaphysics is about God. And you see, it starts with us, with what we long for, and it reaches all the way through. And there are mysteries along the way that you will never master. But to know of the mysteries and attempt to master them is ennobling of life. It is the thing that can make one happy. And I will tell you from close personal experience in this blessed profession I've taken up, which, by the way, I avoided like the plague for a long time. That is what is satisfying to people. That is what can make them happy. And so, in order to remove the problem that Plato's Republic is difficult, we abandon it, or we corrupt it, or we condemn it. And that is dehumanizing. That will kill every one of us, and it will destroy the children first, as it is doing. You know, we're very rugged at Hillsdale College. And Johnny did characterize how I spoke to him about that dumb stuff he did. But at the same time, I loved him for it. But he has to get the sense, every one of us do, we have to get the sense that it is hard to live well. You know, Thomas Jefferson is one way a bundle of contradictions. And because we have proscribed him, we don't see the contradictions anymore. Because it's true, he was a slaveholder. It's true, he didn't let them go. That's a shame. But it's also true that he never spoke of that institution without condemning it in language that only Thomas Jefferson could produce. In the contest between the master and the slave, the Almighty has no attribute that can side with us. Indeed, I tremble for my country when I think that God is just. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't it tragic to be pronounced by him? And then we don't know. Where I live in Michigan, it's the Northwest Territory. There are 5 states carved out of it. It's the first time in history that a free republic grew. In other words, no colonies, equal states. Everyone gets to be a citizen just like us. Well, it's the second of our 4 organic laws. The first is the Declaration of Independence. The article is the third. The Northwest Ordinance and the Constitution of the United States. The Northwest Ordinance was written and passed by the Congress in the same year, in the same city, as the Constitution of the United States. And it contains a provision how we're going to grow. We're going to grow by welcoming equal citizens. And it also contains a proscription against slavery ever being there. And the person more than any other who is responsible for that proscription is none other than Thomas Jefferson. One of the first great acts of liberation, one of the greatest in all of human history. And we never mention that. And you see what that deprives the young of knowing? It's just like the same thing that's the lesson in Plutarch's Lives. We must try to live in a way to emulate the divine. But that's hard, and we won't fully do it. And that gives them the motive to grow and improve. Education is not like making something. It's like helping something to grow. And the growth is in the something. And by forgetting that, we forget what human beings are, and that's where our freedom will die. And is dying right now, probably by force. But that cannot happen. And the reason is, the beautiful things are beautiful, and they call to us. We want to know them. A great teacher of Aristotle says, how can you recognize a beautiful thing? It makes you want to cry when you see it. Or it makes you determined to sacrifice even your life for it. These tyrants and nihilists who are abounding underestimate the divine and mighty force of that. And that, I will close by saying, is why all will be well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arnn. Well, that concludes our program for this evening. I want to give one shout out to the ISI staff who makes pursuing our mission of educating for liberty possible, especially for Alyssa Schultz-Fricker, who is our event planner, who designed everything that you've partaken in this evening. Have a good night, and I will see you at ISI's homecoming in May.